And the recording has started as well. I'm just going to share my screen. I just have a couple of introductory slides while we wait for people to join us. Thank you all so much for joining. We'll just give you a couple of minutes. I can just see the numbers going in here. Couple of housekeeping rules. We're recording the webinar. The chat is disabled, but there's Q&A where throughout the webinar you can ask questions and we will get to them as we see fit. And if we don't get to them, we'll answer them later. And yeah, I'm just waiting to see the numbers kind of stabilize, but that seems to be still a few people popping in. But anyway, let's get started. Thank you all so much for joining on this Kronos Hub webinar on what authors want. My name is Romy Beard. I'm the head of publisher relations at Kronos Hub, and I just wanted to quickly set the scene for why I've pulled this list of speakers together. And we're going to do introductions in a minute, but really, I've worked in scholarly communications for 20 years. I've worked with publishers, aggregators, technology providers, and I go to a lot of conferences, publishing conferences, and there's so many topics. At the moment, the hot topics are artificial intelligence, research integrity, how do we deal with paper mills, as well as open access. And a lot of these discussions include publishers and other stakeholders, but I find there's a little bit of a shortage on the author perspective, the researcher perspective in this. There's like the odd one here and there. So that's why I wanted to put together this panel purely on the author experience, the researcher experience on these topics, and have a bit of a discussion about it. So I try to go for like a wide coverage in terms of geography and subject areas covered. And this will be a really informal conversation. I have a list of questions that we'll go through, and hopefully we'll hear from our speakers here what their perspective is like, and get a bit of insight and the kind of research perspective on various topics. So I'm going to ask you in the order that you listed here on the slide to just really quickly introduce yourself, where you're based, what's your area of research, and just to give the audience an idea, how many articles have you published, just so we get a bit of an idea. And can you please kick it off, Robin?
Yes. Thank you so much for inviting me today. As mentioned, my name is Robin Tegland. I'm a professor at Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, Sweden. My areas of research are related to innovation, entrepreneurship, strategy, and what I'm really interested in looking at is how do new technologies such as AI enable a transition to circular economy business models and circular ecosystems. Oh,
Thanks
how many articles?
Paul.
Sorry, I forgot that question as well. I don't really know. Dozens, more than 100 publications. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Through the years.
Season published.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Paul.
All right. Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Wilms. You can read my name right there as well. I'm professor of systems ecology at the Luxembourg Center for Systems Biomedicine of the University of Luxembourg. I work on microbial communities or microbiomes. We study these in the environment, but also have a very strong focus on the human microbiome and trying to understand how functions in the context of microbiomes might go into disarray and how they then may trigger human chronic diseases in particular. I've published around about 200 peer review papers, and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katarina Jungo. I'm a Swiss epidemiologist and health services researcher, currently based in Boston in the US, where I do my postdoc at the Brigham and Women's Hospital and the Harvard Medical School. I conduct research on how to reduce medication-related harm in older adults and patients with chronic conditions who use many different medications. And I have published around 40 articles.
I'm Nkuba Michael. I'm a research scholar from the Okavango Research Institute, University of Botswana. I've been researching on the area of climate change adaptation, indigenous energy system, and climate services. I've so far published 8 journal articles where I'm first author, a few others where I'm second author, but 8 where I'm a first author. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. And unless I'm mistaken, I don't think Alan made it today. So let's kick off the discussion. So my first question that I wanted to, oh no, Alan has raised his hand. He is here. I'm so sorry. He snuck in.
Yes, sorry, sorry, no problem. Apologies for my late arrival. I was stuck in a meeting that overran slightly, but I did make it in the end.
No problem at all. I'm so glad you could join.
Yeah, just if I can just echo the introductions I just heard the end of there. I am a historian. I work in Scottish history at the University of Dundee in the UK. And I've so far published, I think, about 20 journal articles in various British, European and North American journals. So hopefully I can contribute usefully to the discussion that we have today.
Thank you so much. I really struggled to find someone on the kind of the social sciences, humanities side. So I'm really glad you're here, because I suspect there's some differences when we get to some of the questions. As I mentioned earlier, Alan, I'm going to go through some of the questions that I shared with you. If you feel like you want to say something, just put your hand up and then we can go through, do the rounds, but you don't have to say, if there's a question you don't want to particularly answer, then that's also fine to sit it out. So the first thing I'd interested to hear about is how you determine which journals you want to publish your research articles in. Is it things that you've been reading, that your colleagues recommend? Anything you can share on that would be great.
Maybe let me try. Go
ahead.
Now, since we are working with students, one of the things I use is called Journal Finder. Journal Finder in Google allows you to, one, put in your topic and your abstract. Now, then you go publisher by publisher. There's one for Elsevier, there's one for Springer, Taylor and Francis. Now, the beauty with Journal Finder is that it shows you with this particular publisher which kind of journals suit that particular abstract and title. And that can be quite helpful to find out where to publish. Now, especially from a student perspective, sometimes the publisher could have some journals which even you're not aware of, but yet they're relevant to your work. The other one is also, as you're writing, you'll find certain articles you keep referring to. And then you're like, okay, most likely this can be one. So that can be also another line to show you, where should I publish, especially now when you've come to the end of your paper. For now, I can submit those two.
Thank you, Michael. Robin?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we have a bit of a different approach because basically we start off by thinking about which discipline or field does one want to actually publish within. Is it innovation? Is it entrepreneurship? And so on. But working at engineering university or business schools, we have lists that we need to go by in terms of promotion. So, for example, we have the AJG list that we tend to look at and say, okay, well, we have these journals that are level 4 star, level 4, level 3. And then, so you have a different list of categories of journals and ranked. But then the question that's really of interest is, what debate are you entering into with your article? So in other words, is there, is it one question that's within innovation, for example, that you're various in? So then you try to understand, go into the journals and actually look using some of the tools that are out there to figure out, okay, which journals are those where the debate is currently going on that we can then enter into? So who am I citing and where are these people actually publishing so that we can enter into that debate?
Right.
So so it's kind of that two-pronged approach. And then clearly after that, it's depending, okay, what is the time frame? Am I just interested, for example, a PhD student needs to get something published to actually get their thesis defended. So maybe you want to do a lower ranked journal. But maybe you have different criteria at your university where you only need to get one top ranked publication. So then it gets back to also the individual requirements or within which kind of the boundaries within which you're working as an academic. I can just say from my experience working here in Sweden and working with colleagues in Europe.
Interesting point about the kind of research assessment at the beginning there in terms of a journalist. Katarina, what's your experience like on this?
I think it's very similar to what Robin said, because I'm also working in a pretty interdisciplinary field. So depending on what exactly the topic of the article is. It's a very different set of journals that are suitable and that may be suitable for it. What I think of first is like the good fit, the target audience, and like in with regards to the topic. Then, of course, I think that's also what Robin hinted at. Like in terms of career development, there's definitely some journals that are higher ranked than others, and it depends on the institutions. But that is also something to consider when you pick journals. What I usually end up doing is making a list of target journals, and I think where that factors is how you rank the individual journals. I also thought about the timing element that Robin already explained, like depending on how much like different ones you want to try, that also affects the choice of which one you're going to start with. And I think in general, like based on the experience of me, my mentors and co-authors, we would think about what suitable journals are. But to echo what Michael has said, I've also used Jane or Journal Finder, I think is what the name is in the past, to just see if I'm missing any new journals that could be interesting.
Interesting. So again, what I'm hearing is impact factor is still really important. Sometimes on the publishing side, people like to think that researchers don't care about them anymore, but I think you do. Paul, what about you? I know you publish with the American Society for Microbiology, one of our partners. How else do you pick your journals? Do you keep going back to the same publishers or the same journals even?
That varies. I wouldn't say that we have a preferred journal. In relation to what has already been said, I would just like to add one, I think, important criterion is quality. And in particular, you know, I mean, choosing journals where you know that there are authors or scientists that publish in those journals that you really, you know, that you actively follow and that you also respect the work of. I think that that is very, very important. And then the other aspect is, of course, I mean, students as well as postdocs and anybody else, I mean, wants their work to be read. So I think accessibility of the journal, and there we're immediately touching on the topic of open access. I think that that is also a very strong criterion. If a journal obviously at the minimum would have to offer an open access such that, yeah, we would be getting the exposure that we would, of course, aspire to.
Interesting. So that is one of your criteria, whether open access is an option for a journal or not.
Well, absolutely. And that, I mean, we will touch upon that later. Also, of course, most of our funders actually have that also as a strict criterion. So, but even before these, you know, open access policies were mandated by funders, even before then, I mean, open access was always a very important criterion in choosing a journal.
Same for you, Alan, or different?
Yeah, I mean, there are some similarities with what's being said, but also some peculiarities, I think, in a more humanities-focused discipline. I think the first thing to say is that the issue of journal quality, I don't think is quite so crucial well, quality is not the right word, but journal prestige is not quite so crucial in humanities. It's still there. I mean, there are certain journals in history, past and present, the English Historical Review, the American Historical Review, these kind of journals which are prestigious, and getting into them can do good things for one's reputation. But for individual articles, I think that a more important criteria is really the fit. If your article fits within the range of interests that the journal covers, speaks to the audience that you're hoping to communicate with through your article. And in particularly my field, I work in Scottish history. We have an ecosystem of very specialist journals led by the Scottish Historical Review, which is dedicated to our field. So quite often, if you like, sort of pot boiler work, so, you know, not the kind of stuff that's going to change discourse, but is important research nonetheless, that might go towards those sort of specialist journals. If we're sort of capping a long research project with the big piece of research, then that might be targeted at something like past and present on the understanding it's more likely to reach an audience beyond our field. So those are the kind of things we think about. It's really about fit. I should say about open access, that is increasingly important, not least because the research excellence framework in the UK, the research assessment system that the UK government has put in place requires material that's going to be submitted to that framework to be open access. At the very least, the green open access level, where people can access author accepted manuscripts. So that is an important consideration for people in my field as well, I think.
But you're not funded by a funder that mandates open access of their, final record version of records straight from
that can happen, but funded research of that kind is less common in the humanities than some of the harder and scientific disciplines. We do more of our research with sort of in-house funding. So it's a consideration if you have a funded research project, but a lot of articles will emerge from a non-funded research project. So that's not a consideration in those cases.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. And generally, that on the humanities, there's less funders demanding it in the way that I know the FNR in Luxembourg it does. For any researcher who gets funding from them, have to publish Gold away immediately.
I wanted to add a little spin on this question. Coming from an African perspective, there are also people who look at what we call national journals, then what we call regional journals, region in terms of Africa, and then there's what we call the international journals, or what we call the global journals. Now, in relation to these aspects to do with, for instance, if someone is a PhD student and it's a requirement to graduate, what we begin to see is that some of them say, okay, if I can get an African-wide journal and get my article in, I'll rush for that. So for us here, even there's that aspect of, is it a national journal, regional, or the international journal, or what we call global journals? Maybe let me put it that way. And in my particular field, just to also echo what someone said, for instance, I'm in the field of climate change, and we have particular journals which are in that field. So if you're into climate services or meteorology, there are also journals in that field. But my little experience is the ones on the top are usually not good to recommend, especially for an early student, because they tend to have what we call journal politics, as we shall be going along the way. What that means is they tend to first look, who are you co-author with? And if it's not a name they tend to know, they're like, okay, who is this? But maybe that will come a little bit along the way. But all I wanted to say is there's national journals, regional journals, and global journals. Okay, over to you.
And that obviously echoes what Alan said as well, in terms of, how if it's an article that you want to have wider reach, or that's a bit more specific. Katerina, Robin, do you want to add anything on the kind of OA requirements? Is that criteria that you look at when you decide where to publish?
Not really. I can say it depends on the funding body, and so far, I mean, it goes kind of hand in hand, but I'd say generally not. No.
Okay, completely fine. Katerina, you wanted to say something as well, though.
Yeah, I think when I put that list together of suitable target journals, depending on who funded the work, or whether or not I was funded through a fellowship that requires open access, it is definitely something to consider. So I go through the different options. For example, I used to be funded through a fellowship from the Swiss National Science Foundation, and they would pay for like 100% of the open access fees in journals that are fully open access. Then through my former Swiss institution, there's other like read and publish agreements or an open access fund. So would go through all the different possibilities. What I would like to add from an early career perspective is that there's sometimes a bit of a contradiction between which journals would be most suitable for like career development, which will be considered highest impact, and what like the different open access funding mechanisms pay for. And I'm saying this while being very grateful for all the resources that are out there, but a lot of the bigger journals in my field, they stick to the subscription model. And if you want to publish open access in them, it's a lot more than a lot of funders or open access funds at my previous institution would pay for. So I think that puts researchers, and I guess particularly early career researchers, into a difficult spot.
Yeah, totally. And that's something I've heard a lot. So nice to have that echoed. Well, not nice, but yeah. I want to come back to something that Michael said at the beginning when he talked about journal finders and putting in an abstract to get a list of suitable journals. So that's essentially using artificial intelligence technology, right, to match an abstract to previously published journals in order to find a good match. AI is in general like the big topic in publishing conferences, and obviously related to writing articles. So one open question to you guys is, do you use any tools, any artificial intelligence tools when you write your papers? Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, this genie is out of the bottle. And everybody's using it, of course. So, I mean, for writing, I would also say important in the context of, for example, some of the work that we do also, I mean, students and postdocs, they use it for coding. I mean, large language models generally. And I think this is basically also the state of the art. I mean, we, of course, want to progress fast. So I think the proficiency that these tools they bring to the fold is of course important and not to be neglected. That is of course thing one has to be aware of, and everybody's using it, right? And I think there are of course limits to this. I think if you of course want to say that something is your own work, I would think that having prompted ChatGPT, DeepSeek, or whichever tool you might be using, I think that is where a line is crossed in my mind. But then others have other perspectives on this that I'm fully aware of. But I think it's just, I mean, it is a very powerful suite of tools, generally to do research. And so I think one has to just be open to it. I mean, this is not going to go, you know, the genie is not going back in the bottle. What I would say, though, where I think one has to also, I think from a publisher point of view, look out for is obviously, you know, we are all aware, I mean, and they're getting better and better, but I mean, typically large language models do still hallucinate. And this is obviously, I think, very, very concerning in the context of fields whereby, you know, you might have bogus information that might be out there. Then the tools or the large language models are again trained on this bogus information, and this becomes a runaway process. So I think there's still a need for us to really do diligent rereading of anything. But yeah, I think that they are such, I mean, they are so powerful. Allow us also in the context of research to make connections that our own mental capacity is not capable of. I think we are also seeing the limits of the human intellect here. And I think it's in the context of research specifically that, I mean, yeah, they are bringing so much to the fold, these tools.
But what I'm also hearing is there's a need to educate and to set some guidelines, which I think a lot of publishers are trying to do. Because you said a number of things there. You said, you know, using ChatGPT to write your article is crossing a line, but of course we need to use the tools. That there is obviously a wide range of tools on, like, you know, using it to find information or using it to refine what you've written are different things. Do you find guidelines from publishers helpful on this, or are you given guidelines by your organizations of what's okay and what's not okay?
No, I wouldn't say so. But I mean, what we have in terms of, I mean, I can only speak there for our lab because there is no institution-wide policy on this, other than, of course, everybody is aware that everybody's using it. But I think for me, if we're writing a paper, I think using tools to basically correct grammar, orthography, and so on and so forth, I think that is still fair game. I mean, this is basically like doing spell checking, you know, still 3 years ago, I guess. But that's where I draw the line. I don't like to have full paragraphs, you know, introduction of a paper that is fully outputted by ChatGPT. And it's easy to anyhow, I mean, of course, these tools are getting better and better. Also, you can also humanize the text by now. But generally, you can really spot it.
Yeah.
So,
But
yeah,
there's
so
also the problem is if you would say throw in a draft of your article into an LLM and say, can you make this better? There's also the issue of that draft is now being used and trained in some way. And that's where publishers also put lines and say, well, you can't submit any of your material. If you want to submit it to us, you shouldn't be submitting it somewhere there because it's somewhere out there and who knows what's happening with it, right?
sure.
Yeah. Right,
But I mean,
Alan.
Maybe just one last point. I mean, I think in a classical journal article, I mean, you might be able to use it for the introduction, but that's where it ends. I mean, because you can't have it to write your results, your discussion, and your conclusion. But even for the intro, that's where I draw the line. I mean, I don't think we should use these tools just to make our life easier.
Thanks, that's super clear. Alan.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm a bit of a, I suppose, a Luddite with this kind of thing. I've never used AI in any form apart from, I mean, unless you count sort of library catalogs as a form of AI, I'm not sure. But in terms of using it, certainly using it to generate text for an article, I've never used it and never would. I find that deeply ethically problematic. There's also a constraint on this with my field of history because of obviously most of the materials we use for research are archival materials, which exist only in physical form in libraries or archives, the type of thing that AI doesn't have access to firsthand. Directly, it will obviously have access to research results written up as a result of others using those materials. So that there's a limit, I think, to what to the application of this technology when you're focused on archival work. There will be other historians, I'm sure, and I'm only speaking for myself here, but there will be other historians who are doing different kinds of research, which will involve large data sets, who may find a better application for artificial intelligence in their work. But for me, it's not something I've used and not something I see much utility for in my own work.
Thanks, Alan. Robin?
Yep, thanks. No, I think they're tremendous tools. I would agree with the discussion about not using it for the writing, but it's a fantastic tool to help get new ideas, to get insights about your data that you might not have picked up on yourself. I mean, even like I've Scopus.ai sometimes of like seeing different themes and other themes that can come up, or using some of the other tools like the co-citation networks, maybe so you can find an article that you didn't know about to help your literature search process to be much more efficient. I think in terms of the actual writing process, no, I think that's where most of the creative process comes when you're actually writing. So I think it's very hard to give that over to such a tool, other than saying, okay, here's some data, and maybe you can use different tools where you don't have to give it access as training data down the line, but that you can say, okay, is there an insight here I missed? What other insights? What other or asking it to play the role of a reviewer. Sometimes I know other academics who do that. They actually have created even different agents, where one agent is the one that goes out and searches for literature, another agent is the one that summarizes the literature, another one helps with the writing process, and then another one actually plays the role of a really critical reviewer. To see where are the gaps in the logic and so on. So I think there's different ways of using it, but I would say that the real creative process is actually coming when you're doing the writing. That's when you start getting the insights and making those connections that you hadn't really seen before. But I think this is something that probably differs from field to field, where in ours, we're in business administration and so on. It is about gaining those insights from, especially if you're working with qualitative research and trying to make sense of a lot of interview data or secondary sources, not doing statistical methods. So,
yeah, writing is a process. Yeah. Katerina?
First, I would like to second what has already been said. So like these tools have really changed how I code. I mean, it's a tremendous help. I wouldn't rely on any tools to write for me, but of course, like all these tools that can help like copy edit or do grammar checks. I mean, that's really, really helpful. I guess that's probably also one of the reasons this is so popular, maybe even more so with like non-native English speakers. There's a couple of elements that went through my head as I heard other people speak about it. I think it's really important to have better guidance on how to acknowledge any use of tools. Recently reviewed an article and I saw that they wrote a line about it in the acknowledgements, which I found really interesting. I mean, probably everyone had seen like that one study team that published with, I think, ChatGPT as a co-author. Probably that was a joke, but I mean, it's really something important that we have to think about how we acknowledge it. I think we also need to better understand like what these tools do with the data that we put in. I've heard that like other people seek input on how to interpret data, and I think it's really important to better understand the different like ChatGPT versions, maybe the paid versions versus the free one. What happens with all the data that I put in? And the last point that is related to this that I would like to mention is, I mean, I guess that's also AI tools that they can really help like facilitate the submission process. I mean, now sometimes you have to input your paper draft and it already auto-fills like some of the forms. I mean, these things are tremendously helpful because it's the more annoying part of like going through a submission portal and fill out every single cell with information. So I feel like that's a really nice use of using such tools.
Yeah, and that's something our platform does as well. But I feel like in AI gets lumped together as like one big thing, but there's actually so many different things, like using it for processes like that, extracting metadata, or using it to write something completely from scratch using a large language models are very different. And then also if you had like kind of a closed language models, that's the kind of vision that I have, is like, why don't publishers all work together to have like their, quality assured content that's where you filter out what Paul called the bogus information, and you don't have hallucination, you always have references, what you're reading is actually true. But at the very beginning, when ChatGPT came out in the kind of scholarly publishing industry, there was actually some real emails about like whether ChatGPT should be listed as a co-author or not. And then publishers came out with guidelines on whether that was okay or not. And I know most publishers now have some kind of guidelines that you need to acknowledge what tools you used or how you used them. And if they allow it, that you have to state that you use ChatGPT in the writing, even if it was just for your introduction. I think there's that kind of acknowledgement part, but it sounds like it's still not really widely understood what is okay and what isn't okay. Like you guys seem to be like, okay, for me, this is like a red line. This is where I draw the line. Whereas for someone else, it might be different, right?
If I can just very briefly react to that, I feel like it's also really interesting because there's so many different versions of a manuscript, especially like in my field, we tend to have like pretty large group of co-authors sometimes. So, I mean, there's a lot of people who give input and like so many different versions, and maybe someone uses Grammarly on their, device and they don't even realize it because it's just there and they work with it. So it's really hard to keep track of this, I think.
Yeah, but definitely like those kind of tools like Grammarly, Word, that's a no-brainer, but we don't even think about that as AI anymore, do we? But it is, right? And obviously then we have the other extreme where you have entire papers being written by some kind of paper mill, by large language models are being used, and that is like a super high concern at the moment for many publishers, these kind of phishing attempts. I've had a couple of publishers that I work with closely. I've had their authors come to them and said, hey, why is my article not published? And they said like, well, I didn't get your article. And there's somebody who created it was like the journal of something instead of journal of something, replicated their entire site, editorial board, and the publisher themselves were like, there's nothing I can do here because you didn't submit the article to me. It's now with this fake publisher. So it kind of goes on both sides. So I wondered if you guys have any experience with either, fake journals, fake editors being solicited or being invited to review papers where you think, hey, this is not real. Paul?
So I would say that our spam filters at the university have gotten much, much better. And luckily, I do not get these solicitations either from fake journals or fake conferences, or basically these kind of extortion mechanisms anymore. So that's very good, because we were we were getting, of course, inundated with this. But I've not had any experience with submitting to, let's say, a wrong journal. I think, I mean, one knows what to do, right? I mean, but maybe that's not the case everywhere. I don't know. But generally, yeah, I've not had issues in that regard.
Robin?
Yeah, no, I would agree with what was just said. Filters have gotten much better. We used to get a lot more of those. I think one of the challenges, though, is how a journal changes over time. So, for example, a few years back, the journal Sustainability, everybody was, that's where you should publish. And now it's like, no, don't publish there. It's predatory, or you hear these different rumors. And I think that, or this, publisher has a very bad reputation. I think that's, how do you stay on top of those, which journals are continuing with a good reputation versus those reputation is getting worse. And I know we have impact factor indices and so on, but still there is something there to be said about how they change over time, which is difficult to follow. And I think that's one reason why too, then, especially if you're a younger scholar starting out, you tend to say, okay, which of the journals that have been around for a long time that have that high reputation? Yeah. All right.
Yeah, Katarina?
I had a similar experience because I also thought about the rapidly changing environment. It's kind of hard to keep track. So to share an anecdote, I was working with a junior researcher who was thinking of getting one of her PhD papers published. And there was that one journal in the field that was really used to be very respectable. Some of the people at our institute had published there. So we picked that one, and then we started the submission process. And right after submitting, there were so many red flags, emails such as if you review for us now, kind of you'll get a discount. And it was almost as if I don't know, it was really, really strange. Also then I told her let's ask to withdraw. I don't feel good about this. And they were it was 1 or 2 days after submission. They were no, we already have 2 reviewers. This is not going to work. I'm I don't care. This is implausible. Let's withdraw. But it's really hard to keep track, and maybe sometimes you only notice once it's already almost too late. Yeah, so I can second that experience that Robin also shared.
But that's why Robin, you said at the beginning you have journal lists that you've been told from your institution these are the journals you should be publishing in, because we've verified that they are, and it's not the Scopus list or DOAJ, it's a different list for your institution, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Well, it's a very well known. It's the academic journal guide. I mean, for business schools. So, and then there are a few others, like within information systems, used to be the basket of 6. I think it's the basket of 8. Might even be a basket of more. But generally speaking, within each field, yes, you have, kind of which journals are the more highly ranked ones, and the ones more reputable. But what's the challenge, I think, there is when there's a new field emerging. Where new journals pop up and you don't know which direction they're going to be taking. So I think that's one of the challenges there.
And do you then look at who the publisher is? This is maybe an interesting question. A hand went down. Do you look at the journals as a brand or the publisher as a brand? If you say, okay, I know this is a reputable society, they're launching a new journal, I don't have any concerns here. They might not have an impact factor because it's a new journal, but I'm going to go for it. Versus just the journal title, and you need to be absolutely certain that's on the list.
You definitely look at who's behind it, I would say. Definitely. Who's the publisher behind it? Yeah. Or people. I mean, it could be people behind it. It could be, you do see that where you have very reputable scholars saying, we don't feel like, we don't like the way this journal is, the way the direction this journal is going, or we don't, we see a whole new area emerging and we would like to, speed up the process. This is ridiculous that it takes 2 years to get an article published. I mean, sometimes it's, crazy. I remember we waited a whole year to get reviews back, and at the end of the year, the senior editor said, well, so sorry, but I only have 2 of the 3 reviews back, so we still can't get. I said, so we had to pull the journal from review and start the process all over again. So it's so there are authors or academics who say, okay, enough already, and go off and start a new journal. And generally speaking, okay, yes, they're very reputable. They're the leaders in the field. I think this is a good outlet for my research. If of course there's the fit. Yeah.
Yeah. So you both talked a little bit about, retracting your submission, right? It's already been in and you're like, I've got a bad feeling, or this is taking too long. Do any of you have any experience with retractions as such, either a paper you've co-authored or the main author that someone came and said, oh, there's a mistake in it, you need to put in a correction?
No, I've never had anything. You read about that. I mean, we have a lot of bad stories in the field with senior professors and manipulation of data, and PhD students publishing on manipulated data, and numerous articles having to be pulled from very, very high level journals. But I've personally never had that experience. Yeah.
Me neither. Never had the experience that I wanted to withdraw a published paper. There's a different thing that happened to me though twice, where the publisher messed up the co-author, the abbreviated version of the co-author names in the citation, because I had different family names, and it was very difficult to get that changed. And I hadn't, in both instances, I had not reviewed it. They didn't share it. Now some of them share and ask for approval. They didn't, and it was published. Of course, it was a problem for my colleagues, because their articles wouldn't show up on PubMed because it wasn't really their name. The way, it's just not great.
Right.
And
so
that is the only
used the
time
wrong
I had experience with corrections.
Identifier?
Sorry?
So it's correct. So did they use the wrong identifier for the author's name, and they picked somebody who sounded similar, but it wasn't exactly the same person?
So the person had different first names and last names. So when they abbreviated it, let's use my name as an example. So my name is Katarina Tabea Jungo. I think they did something like TK something, right. TKJ Jungo or something. And yeah, that totally messed it up.
That's just where identifiers come in, right? If you, even at submission, have an identifier for each of your authors, then all the way through that wouldn't happen. Sorry, one of my pet hates. But it's more rectifying the metadata than rectifying the actual content, right?
Yes, and still I didn't really like the fact that it had to be treated as a correction, as if it was a mistake in the article, because now it also shows up like that on PubMed. And I asked him to point out that it was their mistake, but yeah, it was very unfortunate.
Yeah, well, that's interesting to share that experience. Thank you so much. So for the rest of the time, and we're running out of time, I could spend a few more hours with you guys. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the publishing experience in general, what your experience has been like with different systems, different publishers, from submission right through to peer review. If you have anything general or specific you'd like to share there, who wants to kick us off? Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give a sort of a couple of reflections of things that that often present problems or cause irritation. One, and we've already sort of talked about it tangentially, is length of time that the process takes. I mean, in my field, it's perhaps not quite such an urgent concern as in some scientific fields where research is moving perhaps a little faster. But still, if you're waiting 2 years for an article to come out, that's ridiculous. So speeding up, because I understand there are all sorts of practical constraints that come into play there, but that's something that I think would be appreciated if there was a way found for journals to get things out a little faster. There's been some progress on that recently with kind of pre-publication online, for example, that often speeds up, that can be used to speed up the process. So that's one issue. I mean, another is to do with peer review, and this I suppose is a point more for journal editors than publishers, but it's how one handles the peer review process, both in terms of locating peer reviewers, which is a big challenge. People are very busy. It's a labor-intensive process to offer peer review, and that can contribute to the length of time it takes to get articles out. Another point is how one deals with peer reviews which are which are not helpful, shall we say, which are either aggressive or abusive or whatever. Again, this is maybe for editors rather than publishers, but there should be an awareness that some peer reviews require some degree of editorial intervention to shield the author from unhelpful or abusive content or feedback, I think. And I'm not sure that's always done. You just get the peer review sent to you as it was submitted, and perhaps a bit of gatekeeping would be useful, particularly when you're dealing with younger scholars who've not published before. It can be very frightening when you get a bad peer review. So, I mean, those are my sort of general reflections. As I say, the first one, perhaps something for publishers to think about. The second one, really more for editors. But those are the two things that I think have repeatedly struck me as problems within the process of getting an article published, certainly in my field.
Thank you, Alan. That's super interesting. And certainly I've heard a lot of discussions about providing more training for peer reviewers, more guidelines, asking them to be more constructive. I know the IUP Publishing Institute of Physics, while that isn't your area at all, they have a peer review rating where the editor would rate the quality of the peer review. And then you get a peer reviewer score. So again, that's to make sure that, you know, the peer review brings value and is constructive, but also, you know, it's done properly. Katerina, you want to jump in?
To add to what has already been said, I would also like to point out the intransparency of what is happening behind the scenes. Sometimes the submission portals are not really helpful and you don't really know where your journal is at. You have no idea about the timeline. What I would like to emphasize is that there's really big differences across like the submission platforms of different publishers. And I kind of feel like sometimes it's the small things that make submitting to a specific journal or like to a specific publisher more pleasant. Maybe not only the submission, but also I'm thinking of like the different platforms I've seen to submit proofs. Some of them are really annoying. So I think like you can really make like researchers' life easier when you don't make these, when you make these tools like more user-friendly. One thing that is
Are you talking about ease of use in terms of like the interface, how easy it is to determine where you're clicking?
Sometimes it's really hard. Exactly, yeah. Sometimes it's really hard to make the changes and like the system wouldn't really do what you want it to do. And then it takes a lot longer than it should take. So I think like this is something publishers can work on. Then also the fact that pretty much every publisher, but even a lot of different journals within the same publishing house have different submission formats. Seems quite unnecessary in an early stage of submission.
Yeah, and then I completely agree.
To just react to something that was said before, I think one thing would also be to start with like remuneration for peer review. I think that could really help with the quality. Because let's be honest, I think everyone kind of does it pretty much in their free time and they don't have that much to spend on it. And even if we try, right, like paying people to do this work could help with the quality. And here I'm not talking about like small discounts for me to publish in that journal, because I have never used one of those. It just never really works out with like the timeline of submitting like papers and like the scope to come back to what we said at the beginning. So that is not
only valid for a certain number of months. So because I know a lot of publishers do that. They do discount. Wanted to pick up on something you said, Katerina, about, you know, you submit and then you don't really know where your article's at. So you would value more updates between submission and acceptance, or decision, sorry, submission and decision.
I don't really know what the right thing to do would be, because I usually, after a while, I log into the platform and I check the status, but sometimes the status isn't really clear. And sometimes you don't really know if it has changed at all. So maybe also just an audit trail of like the different statuses would be helpful to know, like, oh, it kind of moved up one step, so now it's with the peer reviewers, or like, you know, it has passed the initial check. Just these small things can be very helpful.
Thank you. Robin?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree with what's been said here. The transparency on the process and speeding up would be super good. I think it's also about what happens after, which was one of your questions that you had, and publishers helping. And we're in this to have impact. And so if you publish an article, but then how do you get it out there? How do you enable others to find it? And there's one journal, MIS Quarterly, I believe I have not published there. It was like long time ago, but recently I believe they enabled authors to make a podcast around the paper, or they work with different, marketing and awareness tools. So I think there's something there to be said about, okay, once it's published, then what? Or accepted for publication, then what? And I think one thing that's very confusing for me is, to what degree can I share the article, the or whatever it's called, preprint or whatever it is, with others prior to it actually coming out. And can I make it available? Can I not? Because at the end of the day, one of the things that we are judged on, at least in our field, is very much your citations. And if people can't find it, then, then how do you know if you're having the impact, if you want to use citations as a measure? But I'd also like to say, I think it's not just about other academics, but even turning academic research into something that practitioners can make sense of and can use. And I think getting back to impact, I think that is because it's going to be very hard to change the institutional norms that we have related to how do you progress up the academic ladder. It is about the journals and the publications, and in the right journals and citations and so on. And yes, some places are now beginning to focus more on, what impact you have in society. And I would very much like to see, well, how can we enable our research to actually reach practitioners, to reach government officials, to, policymakers, to actually, so that we could have impact beyond our choir that we're preaching to, or however you want to say.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a real bonus, and something that we need to work so much more on, and in translating our research results into something that society can use. So.
Yeah, but also not just in terms of research assessment and impact. It's not just the number of citation, but it's the story behind it. And Alan,
Exactly.
Maybe you know something about this, but I think on the rep, they're trying to work on that as well. So it's kind of an impact story rather than impact, number alone that you're being judged on.
Yeah. Sometimes exactly some other way of evaluating impact, but then some other way of translating our research into some format that practitioners in society can use.
And yet I believe citations are still super important for you. And Paul, the reason I actually thought of asking you for this webinar is because you posted something on LinkedIn about, I'm the top cited researcher, and there was some post that you did about number of citations that you'd had in that field. So that is clearly something that you're tracking, right?
Well, no, that's basically the Clarivat, has this list of highly cited researchers that they publish every year. And actually institutions have now for years used this as an important metric. They basically, highlight their highly cited researchers, typically have a press release around it, etc. I think citations are important in the sense that they do reflect, whether, your work is being cited, and whether, it is obviously having an impact. Because, I think it is the only real metric that we have in science to assess whether, ideas, results that one might have published on, whether these are having some form of resonance, in the field, amongst others. Now excluding this issue of self-citation and so on and so forth, but I'm talking here about genuinely others citing your research. And I took a bit of a deeper dive in terms of the Clarivat criteria, and I do think that they do a good job, at least in terms of, for example, the metrics that they apply. They do exclude self-citations, for example, etc. I wanted to just maybe add one thing on the tracking. So one tool that or one platform is Research Square, that offers actually quite granular insights into where you're at. I just checked now here, and for one of our papers, and now reviewer number 36 has agreed to review the paper. That just shows one big problem, though. That is that everybody's overburdened. If you're an editor, tracking and trying to find reviewers is becoming harder and harder. This is also leading to very, very long turnaround times on manuscripts. And it is just generally, I think, because the system is oversaturated, and there is also a lack of incentivization, because the incentives are just not there. And I completely agree with Katerina that, I mean, if you look at the profit margins of the big publishing houses, they're, on par with Google, Microsoft around 40%. I mean, and at the end of the day, a lot of that profit margin is due to, researchers doing the job of peer review for free, and also not just peer reviewing, it's editing also, because a lot of the society journals that are also under the umbrellas of the large publishing houses, this is all done pro bono. And so this is, I think, is of course something that at some point has to be tackled, because I think as I say, I think the system is oversaturated right now. People are overburdened, and I think one way that you could try to readjust the system a little bit is at least where there is a monetization for peer review and also editing in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and I know that that's come up in some publishing discussions as well, and the worry there is that you might get, fake reviewers who just want to earn money out of it. But I can totally see that is it is a big problem, and I'm not sure completely the right solution is out there. What's been announced a couple of days ago is a tool by a startup in the States that is using AI to do peer review. I haven't looked at it in detail, but do you think an AI tool would be good enough, would be able to actually perform the actions of what a peer reviewer is doing or should be doing?
Where I would, I mean, if I may just answer that, I mean, from my take, where I think it would do a much better job than us as peer reviewers is to check basically for fabrication of research results, for identification of, tricked images, and that's still around, right? I mean, we've had now these, not a week goes by where you don't hear about, again, one big case in almost. And I think this is also partially due to AI, because I mean, it's basically it is now getting easier to, for example, find falsified images, etc. So I think there, in terms of peer review, AI definitely has an up on us as humans again.
Image checking,
where I would,
and it's yeah.
Where I would say, though, the human is very, I mean, or us as humans are still vitally important, is to just generally judge the quality of the work in terms of like how much of a progress a given paper represents. I don't know if an AI tool in one way or another would be able to, come up with a qualitative assessment of whether that's really an important paper, because I think where AI, I mean, is good at the moment is to go by the existing knowledge. I think where forecasting it can do to some extent, but it cannot project, whether in the future this will be a highly cited paper, for example, in the field. And that oftentimes, again, coming back to citations and projecting how many citations a paper might attract, I think that's a qualitative judgment that we can do. An AI may not.
Interesting. Yeah. Robin, I know we've only got a minute or so left.
No, just I think it's super interesting. I would say yes and no. I just think I think it's human in the loop or AI in the loop, and it should be a hybrid approach for many reasons. I think it's very difficult, even at least in our field, for even senior editors to know what article will be most highly cited in the future. There's a story, Jay Barney, he tried to have his article published several times, resource-based views, this is what I've understood, and reject everywhere. And finally, when he became a senior editor of a journal, he published it, and now it's one of the most cited articles out there in the field of management. So I think it is very difficult to actually foresee, and I think that also depends on the field. Also, I think, I think here research and these articles, it's about pushing the field forward, right? And if these models are trained on the research from the past, how will it actually be able to see what really is moving into the fore? I think this is what is being alluded at. And I can just say, but here's another challenge. One of the challenges then is that, for example, we submitted a paper on open source software communities in the end of the 90s. And we talk about the ecosystem of these open source software community. And the reviewers immediately thought, no, they're talking about like ecological ecosystems, because before the term had really come out within the IS and management literature. And so we got a desk reject, because they had just read and they saw this, it was in the title. And so clearly it was a misunderstanding of our use of the word. So I think there's something, we need both. I think we're still at where we need a human AI hybrid solution.
Absolutely. I'm just putting up the slide for anyone who's, I see some people popping up already. If you want to be kept up to date on future webinars that we're doing, then please join our newsletter. I know I was going to finish off. Maybe you can take a couple more minutes to talk about what you think publishers can do better. Alan, I know you've said you should publish articles quicker. Paul, you've mentioned, some kind of reward for peer review. Katerina, I've written down, more updates during the process. What else would you throw onto that list?
I would have as mentioning, how to enable more impact after the article is published, whether it's either academic or for society.
Yeah, you did say that. Thank you.
It's okay.
Paul, Katerina, Alan, anything you want to add before you wrap up?
I mean, I think the notion of publication as a collaborative effort, it's not so much just on the author's side. It involves editors, it involves peer reviewers, and I think generally maybe re-establishing quite a bit of etiquette around that. I think that we show each other the necessary respect. We are, I think, generally more overburdened probably than ever before. And I think that's where respect and understanding comes in. And I think that is also an important dimension to not neglect. Because I mean, at the end of the day, we're all trying to achieve the same thing, and that is to further research and development in one way or another.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing a lot as well is that there's no standards. I think there's some really good initiatives by some publishers. I think I mentioned IOP in terms of, also what they do is reviewer accreditation. So you get a credit, like you say, on if you've reviewed an article, not just if you're corresponding author or co-author, but you get recognized for the work you've done as a reviewer, or you get rated as a reviewer. But those aren't industry-wide schemes. They're like kind of individual publishers that set something in motion. And I think really that industry is having a lot of discussion, but will only solve this problem by working together and making something a standard for everybody. That's my opinion. Well, it just leaves me to say thank you so much to all of you for taking the time. I know you're like super busy. I really appreciate. I know we only just scratched the surface on some of those things, but actually managed to touch on quite a lot. We didn't really get any questions come through. I probably had too many of my own. But if anything comes in after, we'll share them with you. I probably could have done a whole webinar just on the peer review aspect. So definitely a lot of ideas of what we can do in the future. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, and thanks for everyone who's attended.
Thank you. Thank you for great moderating.
Thanks, everybody.
Well done.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, indeed.
Thank you so much. Very interesting.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.